From September 2013 through December 2014, Dr. Roberts was a consulting professor and William Perry Fellow at the Center for International Security and Cooperation at Stanford University, where he authored a book entitled The Case for U.S. Nuclear Weapons in the 21st Century. Prior to joining the Obama administration, Dr. Roberts was a member of the research staff at the Institute for Defense Analyses and an adjunct professor at George Washington University. Dr. Roberts has a BA from Stanford University, MS from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and a PhD from Erasmus University, Rotterdam. His recent publications also include Extended Deterrence and Strategic Stability in Northeast Asia and On the Strategic Value of Ballistic Missile Defense. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator, Dr. Roberts, and the panelists for Panel 4.
Thanks, everybody, and let me add my thanks and congratulations to General Hyten and his staff for, again, convening this opportunity for all of us to trade notes on our deterrence strategies and the ever-evolving security environment and policy context. As you know, our topic for this panel is integration with and among U.S. allies. And I've had a number of people comment to me on this topic on the agenda that this is a high interest point, that it's great to hear from allies, that there's such interesting perspectives. But I often find my interactions with my American colleagues don't quite come to the point of the central place of our allies in the security environment we live in today. They are on the front lines in a way that we haven't thought of in a long time. And they are essential. They're not only important, they're not adjuncts, they're not helpful. They are essential to sustaining the rules-based international order, which we've referred to time and again today. And this is for the obvious reasons that we've discussed so far today. Let's go back to the start. The nature of the problem of strategic conflict in the environment today is not the problem of the old nuclear-on-nuclear offense bipolar world. It's a problem in which we face, in a more multipolar world, a number of adversaries who seek to unravel the regional security orders that we have built up together with our allies over the decades. And they seek to do so by pressuring those allies, coercing those allies, encouraging those allies to be more congenial and appeasing to the interests of their neighboring powers. And they threaten the United States in the old art of trying to decouple us from the defense of our allies so that we will perceive too much risk, and our allies will perceive our reluctance and thus slowly shift allegiance under the pressure. This puts them, as Kim Jong-un would say, in the crosshairs. And thus, if we're to think about our progress in creating effective deterrence and assurance architectures for the 21st century, it must begin with the question of our allies, their role in those architectures, and the sufficiency of those architectures for their purposes. This also should give us a different way of thinking about the topic of extended deterrence. In that formulation deterrence is something we, the United States, extend to somebody else. It's an umbrella we hold over them. This is the formulation we've used all along, and it's a misleading formulation in this security environment and in the context of the conflicts we confront. Because deterrence isn't something we give as a gift to an ally or that we extend over them. It's something we do together. We heard it in Rose Gottmuller's talk, the central role of unity in deterrence. If the Russian leadership doesn't believe that there's a place to put a wedge politically, then it's not going to attempt to divide the allies from another. And thus, increasingly in both Europe and Northeast Asia, we talk about deterrence strategies built on the common foundation of the work of allies together. And I would say that this has been that the focus on the regional nature of the new problem of strategic conflict in the 21st century has been with us really since Saddam Hussein brought it to us. The Cold War ended, yes, we harvested the peace dividend, but within a year we faced a new strategic problem, a regional challenger with WMD and long-range missiles. And this began to concentrate our thinking on the problem, the new problem of strategic conflict, which in the first QDR, the 1997 QDR, was expressed as the problem of major theater war with a WMD dimension, or with WMD as a condition, a likely condition of conflict. The Bush administration, the George W. Bush administration, set out 4 defense policy goals. You may recall: assure, dissuade, deter, defeat. Assure, first on the list. It was about assuring allies that in confronting the axis of evil, they were going to be safe and secure. And the Obama administration set out a, quote, comprehensive strategy for strengthening regional deterrence architectures, which included nuclear and non-nuclear means, political, the full dime spectrum, and allies have been an essential part of these U.S. efforts all along, and it seems to me the Trump administration has essentially expressed continuity of purpose in this regard. So we have an approach to this new problem set. We have some experience. The question in front of the panel is not whether to integrate for deterrence and assurance in the 21st century, but how. And that discussion of how is readily informed by now a decade or two of experience in trying to come to terms with this new challenge. Because where we are not integrated is that point where that wedge can go, that our adversaries can attempt to separate our allies from each other and from us. So we have numerous panelists, as you've observed, and one addition to do translation duties. And we have been asked to limit our remarks to 5 minutes each. You have in front of you the booklet with the more substantial biographies. We're just going to move down in the order of the speakers identified on the handout, which isn't quite the order on which they're seated at the table. We'll start with Air Vice Marshal Andrew Turner, who's Assistant Chief of the Defense Staff for Operations in the UK Ministry of Defense. Then we'll turn to Brigadier General Christopher Coffelt, who's Deputy Director of Nuclear Ops here at Strategic Command. Then we'll turn to Air Commodore Phil Champion, who joins us from U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, where he is Regional and Multinational Engagement Advisor for Strategic Planning and Policy. Then we'll hear from 3 more allies. First, Major General Naoki Kajiwara, who's Director General for Defense Plans and Policy, the J5 on the Joint Staff of Japan. Then Dr. Jens Ringsmose, Director of the Institute for Military Operations and Vice Dean of the Royal Danish Defense College of Denmark. And finally, Major General JungWoong Lee, who's Director for Strategic Planning and Countering WMD for the ROK. And I've been asked to remind speakers it's our tendency to turn and speak to each other and to look at the screen behind us, but the microphone doesn't follow. So please stay focused on the microphone so the room can stay a part of the conversation. Let me turn to Air Vice Marshal Turner to get us launched. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. And General Hyten, many thanks for your leadership in this domain and for your invitation and opportunity to address this conference. I think it's a tremendously powerful need for us to share ideas and generate unity and solidarity of spirit in this idea of deterrence across what is a very difficult world. And we are unquestionably challenged by this right now, as many of you would have heard me talk yesterday around the failure of deterrence in the United Kingdom on the 4th of March with the use of a primary nerve agent in an English city, for which we'll be engaged in the armed forces for some months through to at least Christmas, excavating and burning soil, vehicles, and renovating buildings, trying to remove what is essentially a extremely damaging and difficult nerve agent. We find ourselves, though, in this sense, building a tremendous unity of spirit around this particular event, no matter how heinous and reckless it was. It generated through our diplomatic service a fantastic array of consensus, both in the NAC, in NATO, but also amongst a number of allies. And we managed to generate 28 different countries expelling 157 different spies from around different capitals around the world. And I think that shows a tremendous unity of spirit. But if there are two underlying challenges that we feel in London that are unfolding in front of us, it's firstly the sense that we're being shown Cold War geography by our Russian neighbours. They're unpacking, to a certain extent, what has been historically true but is no longer true around alliances and spheres of influence and spheres of control. And secondly, we're seeing an insidious redefinition of the rules-based international order without consultation and without, to a certain extent so far, confrontation. But both of those two are undoubtedly likely to change in the near term. So these two angles of challenge are unquestionably going to be in front of us for some years, and I don't think that is going to be at all varied over time. So what do we do about it? I mean, I'm taken straight to your national defence strategy in a really powerful line that I think should be the spirit, the cri de coeur that we should be talking about, which is Secretary Mattis's aspiration to achieve strategic stability and operational unpredictability. The idea that notions will be clear to people before they act, but will be unclear how a response might manifest itself in a post-facto moment. This idea of strategic predictability and operational unpredictability should be at the core of deterrence thinking. It picks up on one of the points in the last speakers who talked of the ambiguity of the response about the Israeli approach, which might be slightly asymmetric in nature, and I think that is part of the remedy. So what to do about it? Well, I've got, much like Niels was yesterday giving a report card, I have 4 A's, which are the approach we might wish to take. And they are, in essence, alliances, attributability, agility, and all of government. That should be the doctrine of our approach. So in the first case, alliances, I'm also minded to support the idea that bilateral alliances aren't as strong as multilateral alliances. I think that's self-evident. But we cannot build enough alliances, no matter how nefarious or difficult they may seem to our adversaries, but we can't build enough alliances around the world around our endeavours and spirits. It would be interesting, would it not, for United Kingdom to be a military observer in the ASEAN loop, where we don't really have a significant territorial sovereignty claim, but we have great interests around UK national interests. At the same time, we're very active in FPDA in the Asia environment. We're big members of NATO. We soon won't be a big part of the European Union, but we remain a core part of European military strength and continuity of intention. So alliances, I think, are definitely a key part of that. I think the alliances should also be built around what you might refer to an 8th grade philosophy. They should be built around geography, history, chemistry, and physics. Geography, where are these countries that we're aligned with? History, where have these countries come from? Where is their unique catalytic capability to act in this place and place? Chemistry, who do these people that we're allied with have specific and unique relationships? And physics, where is the stuff that is going to act in a deterrence mode and modus operandi? So there is something about alliances which isn't about massive totemic historic moments from 1949, but might be fleeting and much more agile and much more adept at holding our adversaries to account in smaller and shorter areas. Attributability is interesting. We talked about first to the facts, first with the truth, the strategic narrative, and the media environment, which is challenging for all of our nations and states as it stands today. But we should be able to find a way that we can have an attribute an act between our nations, between our alliances, quicker and faster than we've ever hitherto been able to achieve. This might use retrospective analysis and analytical tools like we did in Duma with the OPCW around chemical weapons use, but it might also be about a certain degree of trust through 5 eyes or single eye intelligence analysis, which has been found wanting in the last 10 or 15 years, but might need to be the origin and basis around which we might need to act in order to act quicker, to build consensus, build alliances, temporary or fleeting though they may be, around certain heinous contrary acts. I think agility is another part of this. This is as much about governmental, intergovernmental agility as it is about strategic military agility. Self-evidently, the NATO Readiness Initiative, which I think should be a great means of generating pace and perhaps pre-Article 5 or Article 4 consensus in the NAC, but nevertheless, a way in which we can act at a different rate and a different way within our alliances. That isn't necessarily in a structured alliance, but it is also, as I say, around a fleeting engagement. And all of government. I've talked yesterday broadly about the United Kingdom's fusion doctrine, the way in which we would act amongst our different departments of state, the levers of power, the way we would act essentially cognitively across the domains, across the oceans and the continents. But this should be predominantly deterrence based around the non-military levers here, the diplomatic, information, and primarily the economic phases and spheres. This is the area where we'll be able to hold those who are making decisions more quickly to account, more penetratingly so, and actually for a longer period. Economics is ultimately, as we know from our defense budgets, money is king, and that definitely is the case for most of the strategic leaders that we find ourselves availed against. So all of government is crucial. At the operational level, I think we just need to perhaps redefine the general's challenge, getting off the escalation ladder. I think that's a really interesting point, but why are we on it? We should not even be on it, let alone going up it. We should find a way to reset the geometry around what we want to deter, whether that's geographic, physical, functional, or in another domain, where we don't actually find ourselves on the escalation ladder because our purpose and intent is so clearly expressed and our unity of effort and solidarity is so strong and indivisible that we aren't already on an escalation ladder. It, for me, is a challenge. It's difficult, but it's one of cognitive maneuver and how we might overcome our approach together. We must act more together. We saw through RIMPAC great sort of unity of effort, but we can be demonstrating these effects in different parts of the country, continents and world, and message them much more clearly, much more sharply, much more at leadership of the countries that we're trying to affect their decision calculus and their perspection. I think in here, the enhanced forward presence in the Baltics and Poland is a really powerful statement. Here we have just 4 battle groups. They're a mere tactical speed bump if somebody was to not be contained by their intentions. But what they do is massively complicate the calculus in Moscow for taking an act which might trip over a wire and then lead to something much greater, much more decisive. So the ideas around small footprints that make calculus in capitals difficult, I think is a really powerful choice and option that we should perhaps think a little bit more about. Finally, what I would like to just touch on is some of the fears and difficulties around deterrence that we need to navigate around. It is certainly the case that if we set out red lines, as we talked about before, and fail to follow them, then we're going to be in all world of hurt. It's also the case that if we set out a set of capabilities that are found hollow or wanting, then we'll also be found to account. So this appearance of fecklessness would be fatal for any deterrence measure, whether it's in the near term or the far term or geographically spread. We need to be extremely careful around setting a goal that we then fail to achieve. And finally, I think if we don't adopt some of these ideas, if we don't follow a much more coherent and integrated deterrence approach, then the 2 points I raised at the beginning will become fact and not vectors. These points of being re-educated around Cold War geography will become more powerful, prevalent, and more fact-based. The second point, the rules-based international order, will change unless we lay the track in front of that change and then are an actor rather than a recipient of those changes. I'll leave my comments there.
Thanks so much.